So I wanted to acknowledge my co-author, David, and this work was done while I was at WITS. I'm no longer at WITS, I'm at UP, but just acknowledge when the work was done. Hard. I want to start with a bit of social media. Why is academic writing so awful? And this was asked last month. This was the great answer. The opacity of academic prose arises from the epistemological imperative to operationalize disciplinary jargon, facilitating intraspecialized discourse while obfuscating heterogeneous interpretive accessibility and perpetuating a recursive dialectic of erudition and exclusion. Helpful. So then I went to our old new friend, ChatGTP, and I asked, in plain language, what does this mean? And the answer is, academic writing can be hard to understand because it often relies on specialized language. This makes it easier for experts to communicate with each other, but it can also create barriers for others who want to understand the information, leading to a cycle of knowledge that feels exclusive. Then we look for a graphic that could sum up science in one visual. The growing inaccessibility of science, which looks a great article, hidden behind a very expensive paywall. And I luckily have access to that article, and it is an older article now, so many of you will have access to it, through my well-funded university. But even I, through my well-funded university and my previous universities, oh, sorry, I'm a walker, I'm not a stander. I'll try stand. I even don't have access to Nature articles, and those are many of the articles I want to be reading. So the conservation literature tends to emphasize the better translation of science, so it can, for better access and for more usable science. It's emphasizing the academic jargon, the expensive journal subscriptions as noteworthy barriers for the use of science. And in this conservation literature, tend to talk about better translations to policy briefs, to open access sources, which are also hideously expensive, and evidence repositories. And there are some great evidence repositories, and this is one of my favorites, the Conservation Evidence Repository. And there's synthesis and summaries, and there's evidence champions who trial the evidence. So I just wanted to highlight this. So there are these movements to better information packaging. But there's also this notion of evidence complacency, where evidence is becoming increasingly available through repositories, through policy briefs, through open access sources, but it's still not necessarily being used. And this is a quote from the Sutherland paper, and it's found in the practitioner space, but also in the academic space. And it says, increased numbers of open access papers and the development of free repositories have made evidence hugely more accessible. But despite this accessibility, there's evidence that evidence is not being sought or not being used to make decisions. So it's more than just access and translation. And this is a really nice paper by Walsh and colleagues that came out fairly recently. And they did an extensive review of the barriers and enablers to the use of science in practice and in policy. And they did interviews and literature review. And only one of these boxes speaks to evidence and the availability of evidence. All these other factors speak to behavioral, social, relational, contextual factors. So certainly more than evidence. So what we did is we looked at the perceptions of the dialogue at the science policy practice interface in natural resource management. We asked questions specifically about how individuals from different sides of this dialogue viewed their role in knowledge creation and knowledge use, and the role of others in knowledge creation and knowledge use. And it was a survey, was purposively sampling with snowball sampling added. To that, we initially targeted close to 400 surveys were distributed. Not only, it was great, 80 were answered. And this is the breakdown of the respondents who answered. Majority were from the research space, academic researchers and non-academic researchers. A fair amount of broader practitioners in the conservation practitioner space, applied managers, government officials that work in conservation and natural resource management, 16% and 10%. And the smaller percentages were science advisors to policies, science communicators, and environmental consultants. Most of these, we did purposely target those coming from Southern Africa, and most of these were from Southern Africa, but those that weren't indicated that they had experience working in Southern Africa, even if they now lived elsewhere. And this is a very quick summary of what we found. We found three main issues: access, the conceptions between actors involved in this, across this interface, and trust, and that trust really matters. Access was certainly around access to knowledge. It definitely was a notable factor, but it was also access to the right people, access to resources to implement science, access to timeous knowledge, with one of the respondents saying, by the time they get the science, the problem has long moved on, and access to resources. Preconceptions between actors, largely linked to institutional cultures, for example, the academic culture of publish or perish, and institutional reward systems, and misunderstandings of the institutional context and how these things happened. And then trust. And what our results shown that trust was important in determining behavioral path dependencies and how you chose to make decisions, which evidence you sought out. It was important in initiating collaborations, but also maintaining those collaborations. And across the respondent groups, the respondents all acknowledged that there was differential trust relationships and interpretations of what is considered trustworthy. All respondents in our sample said using published research increases the legitimacy of any decisions. But the research community tended to say that the publication of peer-reviewed work and the process of the scientific method was trust enough that the science should be used. In our broader practitioner groups, they highlighted the role of individual and social trust relationships, so personal trust relationships, and highlighted the role of the third-party actor in navigating and sourcing evidence. And this speaks to some work that Coleman and Stern did about trust in natural resource collaborations. And they identified a number of trust levels: affinitive, rational, and procedural. Affinitive was linked to shared positive social relationships, so the feelings about individuals. Rational was about past experiences and competencies, and procedural was in the process. And affinitive was linked to initiating and convening collaborations. Oh, I don't know what I did. Sorry. Rational, so the trust based on competencies, was recruiting new joiners to a collaboration, and procedural was around retaining people in the collaboration. And these third-party actors tend to show high affinitive trust and rational trust. So they're able to bring people into collaboration and also recruit new people to that collaboration. So I know I'm running out of time as I'm going out notes. And so what I really wanted to emphasize through this presentation was that it's certainly access to evidence is a problem, but it's more than just inaccessible, incomprehensible language and journal access. We found that we hoped to contribute that by unpacking these beliefs about that people have about themselves and others, we can sort of navigate this organizational resistance to collaboration. We highlight the role of the embedded scientists and managers for science policy practice interactions, because they are these third-party actors, or you are third-party actors, all of us that are here, because we form the structural bridges between science and policy. We know the rules of the game, and we're conversant in these different spheres. And I just wanted to point out, I'm certainly not the first person to say this. Prof. Rue and many colleagues in this room have been saying this for many, many years. But I'm hoping that these type of data give some additional support to this argument that you are all shouting from the rooftops around. We need better science, we need more usable science, we need science to be used because we're facing these grand challenges that need such urgent, transformative responses. So thank you again for listening. And I think I've got 30 seconds. I've got 30 seconds, and I just wanted to show in my own pathway, we're trying to do this through our research. We're working with Biosphere Reserves to try and co-develop the research platform so we can start having these better conversations. So thanks again, and thanks for listening.